Hello and welcome to another video on the Knight Ministries channel. I am your host, Jeremy Knight. Don't forget to like the video and enjoy the show. Okay. Hello, and welcome to another Complaining About Young Earth Creationism video. And in this video, I want to explain the day-age interpretation of Genesis 1 to young Earth creationists. So, we're going to be talking about the day-age interpretation of Genesis 1, as well as the allegory interpretation of Genesis 1. And we're going to be explaining that to our friends, the young Earth creationists. So stick around, it should be a fun explanation and a fun video. Should be an interesting explanation. Stick around, okay? Okay, so explaining the day-age interpretation of Genesis 1. The day-age interpretation is used for those people that want to accept mainstream science. So if you're a Christian and you're wanting to accept mainstream science, you know, the whole Earth is 4.5 billion years old thing, and the universe is 13.78 billion years old. I think it's that number. I usually just round up to 14 billion. But anyways, you have a universe that is 14 billion years old and an Earth that is 4.5 billion years old. So, yeah. How do you fit Genesis 1 onto that? Well, that's when the day-age interpretation comes along. Instead of 6 24-hour days, you have 6 eras of time, with each era ranging from millions to billions of years. So 6 eras of time instead of 6 days, 6 24-hour days. But you can still call them days because a less literal meaning of the word day is era. So, yeah, you can still call them days. So you can still say that you believe in a 6-day creation, because the word era and the word day are pretty much interchangeable when you're using a less literal definition of the word day. Look it up. Under the more figurative definitions of the word day is the word era. So, yeah, that's in the dictionary. Any good dictionary will say that. But young Earth creationists tend to get annoyed when you point this out. And I prefer the day-age interpretation, not for the ability to accept more science. That's a bonus. Accepting more science is a bonus. But that's not why I prefer it. I prefer the day-age interpretation because it makes more sense with the text. With the way the text reads, it doesn't make sense to cram all of what's happening on those 6 days into 6 24-hour days. You have a lot happening on day 1, a lot happening on day 2, a lot happening on day 3, day 4, day 5, and day 6. You have a lot happening on each of those days. It doesn't make sense to cram them into 6 24-hour days. It just doesn't make sense. So it makes more sense for them to be eras. It makes more sense for them to be eras, because that makes more sense with the text. Go read A Matter of Days by Hugh Ross. He explains it better in that book. I have an entire book review video on that too. Go watch my book review video. But anyways, it really makes a lot more sense to read it as eras instead of as 24-hour days. So that's why I use that interpretation, because it makes more sense with the text. Okay? So right now I want to talk about the allegory interpretation of Genesis 1. I use the allegory interpretation as a way to emphasize the fact that I'm not taking Genesis 1 literally. Well, I should say absurdly literally. Because young earth creationism is an absurdly literal way of reading Genesis 1. I call it absurd because that's what it is. It's absurd because you're trying to cram all the events that occur in Genesis 1 into 6 24-hour days. It makes no sense to do that. And you know why it's literal, because they like to claim the word literal, even though the day-age interpretation is not non-literal, it's less literal. That's explained very well in A Matter of Days by Hugh Ross, how the day-age interpretation is still a very literal interpretation of Genesis 1. It's just not as literal as the young earth interpretation. It's not as absurdly literal as the young earth interpretation, as the calendar day interpretation, as it's more correctly called, calendar day interpretation. But on to my point with the allegory interpretation. I use the allegory interpretation to emphasize the fact that I'm not taking it absurdly literally. The allegory interpretation kind of emphasizes the poetic poetic nature of Genesis 1. The parallelism between each of the 6 days, the repeating of certain events and aspects of each of the 6 days. So, yeah. Genesis 1 has a structure to it that kind of is reminiscent of some Hebraic poetry. So, yeah, I like that interpretation because it emphasizes the poetic nature of the chapter. So the allegory interpretation is a good interpretation because it shows how the chapter shouldn't be taken as literal as the young earth creationists take it. It's not meant to be taken absurdly literally. Okay? So that's why I use the allegory interpretation. Okay? The allegory interpretation of Genesis 1 is a good way to read it to emphasize the poetic nature of the chapter and to emphasize the fact that you're not taking it literally. So I use the allegory interpretation to emphasize the poetic nature of the chapter, the parallelism and the repeating of certain aspects from each day in the chapter, each of the 6 days in the story. So yeah, there's a lot of parallelism going on there, and there's a lot of repeating of certain aspects of each day in the story. So the story has a very poetic structure to it. And this poetic structure indicates that it's not meant to be taken absurdly literally like the young earth creationists do. Their calendar day interpretation is very absurdly literal. And Genesis 1 just shouldn't be taken absurdly literally. So the allegory interpretation kind of emphasizes the poetic nature of the chapter. And that's why it's a good interpretation. Okay? Okay, so now time to explain how the day-age interpretation is still a very literal interpretation of Genesis 1. The day-age interpretation is still very literal because when you use it, you are still emphasizing that the events recorded in Genesis 1 did actually happen. You are still emphasizing that this is a story that is true. It's a true story. It's a structure of telling events that actually happened. The creation story is a true story. It actually took place. It actually happened. God actually did create the universe. The story actually happened. The day-age interpretation still emphasizes that aspect of the story. It just kind of stretches it out a little bit instead of it occurring to the absurdly literal standards of the calendar day interpretation. It loosens the absurdly literal nature of the calendar day interpretation. It takes away that absurdly literal stronghold on in the chapter that the young earth creationists want to place on it. That the young earth creationists want to force into the text. You heard me right. They're forcing it into the text. They're manipulating the text to make it sound that way, when in actuality it reads better in the day-age interpretation. But the day-age interpretation is still very literal. It's still a very literal interpretation. And it is explained better on how literal of an interpretation it is in Hugh Ross's book, A Matter of Days, which I do have a book review video on that book. That's A Matter of Days by Hugh Ross. I have a book review video on that book. Get that book. The literal aspect of the day-age interpretation is explained a lot better in that book. He does a real good job at it. Okay? So let me emphasize again that yes, I do think that Genesis 1 is a true story. I do believe that Genesis 1 is a true story. I do read it as a true story. I just don't take it absurdly literal like the young earth creationists do. So yes, I do read it as a true story. I just don't read it absurdly literally. The day-age interpretation is really good for allowing you to accept mainstream science, and that's why I use it. So all Christians should look into the day-age interpretation of Genesis 1, because it's very helpful in understanding the Bible and allowing you to accept mainstream science. Okay? That's all I have to say. See you in my next video. Okay? Okay. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and ring the bell. And follow me on Twitter and join my Discord. This has been a video on the Knight Ministries channel. I am your host, Jeremy Knight, and I just want to say, see you next time.